Welcome back, friends. This is webinar 3C, Poetic Forms 2. This is a continuation of our previous webinar where we looked at 5 different traditional forms in literature, specifically forms of poetry. And this will be our final look at form as a feature of poetic texts. Just to review, form is a challenge to define. There's a number of ways we can look at it. Form is formal. It is an established way to organize, arrange, or format a literary text. It could be a novel. There are forms of the novel. Like a mystery is a novel form. But really, poetry has the most prevalent range of forms. Forms are traditional. They are established by poets and then reproduced. They are enduring constructions, arrangements, or ways to coordinate various elements, whether they be textual or thematic, in a literary text. There are also rules. If a poem, for example, doesn't follow the established rules for a sonnet, essentially it's not a sonnet. If you follow the rules, you'll reproduce the form. And these rules stay stable, they're separate from others, and they're accepted by authors and readers. Why do we use forms? Or why are there forms? We've kind of covered that, but there are a couple of other things to consider. Forms allow us to compare like types of artifacts. We can compare villanelles to other villanelles. We can compare limericks to other limericks and assess their value and merit. People tend to enjoy things that are predictable and familiar. And we have a compulsion to organize our thoughts and organize the things that we experience and put them into categories of alike, and then be able to determine their difference. I have enjoyed saying that if literature is a whole, then the form is the donut around the hole. Now that's quite metaphorical, but I think it is a way to look at it. I think it certainly is a way to look at it. So let's get started and let's look at 6 other forms in poetry. Here's the first one. A narrative poem tells a complete story from beginning to end. It's a individual or distinct historical or human event that is covered from the beginning to the end inside over the course of the poem. The focus of a narrative poem is plot. Now, there may be emotional language, there may be figurative language, it may be full of themes and meaning, but delivering the plot is the main task, if you will, that the poem provides. Delivering the story to the reader. It'll have characters, it'll have conflict, it'll have setting. It's very similar to a short story in a way. The speaker themselves is the narrator, not a participant in the drama of the poem. They have rhyme schemes. They may rhyme inside of the poem, or they can also be free verse. Within the form, there is something called heroic blank verse, meaning it's in iambic pentameter, but it doesn't rhyme. And that has been a traditional form of narrative poetry. There are others. This is a combination of a number of different subforms of narrative poetry. This is Alfred Lord Tennyson's 1984 poem, The Charge of the Light Brigade. It tells the story of an ill-fated British army action in the Crimean War where a brigade of horse cavalry followed orders to charge at a Russian formation and were destroyed in detail, and tells that story. So here is Tennyson's Charge of the Light Brigade.
Half a league onward, all in the valley of death rode the 600. Forward the light brigade, charge for the guns, he said. Into the valley of death rode the 600. Forward the light brigade! Was there a man dismayed? Not though the soldier knew someone had blundered. Theirs not to make reply, theirs not to reason why, theirs but to do and die. Into the valley of death rode the 600. Cannon to the right of them, cannon to the left of them, cannon in front of them volleyed and thundered. Stormed at with shot and shell, boldly they rode and well. Into the jaws of death, into the mouth of hell rode the 600. Flashed all their sabres bare, flashed as they turned in air, sabring the gunners there, charging an army while all the world wondered. Plunged in the battery smoke, right through the line they broke. Cossack and Russian reeled from the sabre stroke, shattered and sundered. Then they rode back, but not the 600. Cannon to the right of them, cannon to the left of them, cannon behind them volleyed and thundered. Stormed at with shot and shell, while horse and hero fell. They that had fought so well came through the jaws of death, back from the mouth of hell. All that was left of them, left of 600. When can their glory fade? Oh, the wild charge they made. All the world wondered. Honor the charge they made. Honor the light brigade. Noble 600.
Tennyson's Charge of the Light Brigade. If you can take a look at the text, you can see that repetition is quite common in this text. The rhyme scheme, fade and made again, wondered, and 600. Jaws of death, mouth of hell, those are figurative expressions. And the anaphora, the repetition again of 100, 600, rode the 600. Little change, not the 600. So there are a host of different poetic devices here, but they all are a part of a complete telling of a distinct and individualized story from beginning to end. That is narrative poetry. We'll move on. To prose poetry. Prose poetry combines a number of different types of literature into a poem. A prose poem has features of novel writing, short fiction, short stories, and also theatrical fiction like plays. It is quite unusual as a poetic form. Its purpose is not just to entertain or to be beautiful or to pass meaning on to the reader. It also has the purpose to inform or convince the reader of some sort of rhetorical idea. It's almost like a speech. It can be political, it can have social awareness, it can have a moral lesson in it, but it sounds a lot like rhetoric inside of a poetic text. You can see that you'll see that it uses many different literary and poetic devices, repetition, alliteration. It's full of metaphors and apostrophes, similes. So you'll have all the standard devices that you'd see in a poem, but reads and is constructed more like a novel or a speech or an essay, using standard grammatical and syntactic structures, phrases, sentences, paragraphs, rather than stanzas. You won't see much distinctive meter as far as rhythm. Again, it reads a lot more like nonfiction than fiction. The prose poem I'm going to use as an example is the Desiderata by Max Ehrmann, written in 1927.
Desiderata by Max Ehrmann. Go placidly amid the noise and haste, and remember what peace there may be in silence. As far as possible, without surrender, be on good terms with all persons. Speak your truth quietly and clearly, and listen to others, even to the dull and the ignorant. They too have their story. Avoid loud and aggressive persons. They are vexations to the spirit. If you compare yourself with others, you may become vain or bitter, for always there will be greater and lesser persons than yourself. Enjoy your achievements as well as your plans. Keep interested in your own career, however humble. It is a real possession in the changing fortunes of time. Exercise caution in your business affairs, for the world is full of trickery, but let this not blind you to what virtue there is. Many persons strive for high ideals, and everywhere life is full of heroism. Be yourself. Especially, do not feign affection. Neither be cynical about love, for in the face of all aridity and disenchantment, it is as perennial as the grass. Take kindly the counsel of the years, gracefully surrendering the things of youth. Nurture strength of spirit to shield you in sudden misfortune. But do not distress yourself with dark imaginings. Many fears are born of fatigue and loneliness. Beyond a wholesome discipline, be gentle with yourself. You are a child of the universe, no less than the trees and the stars. You have a right to be here, and whether or not it is clear to you, no doubt the universe is unfolding as it should. Therefore, be at peace with God, whatever you conceive him to be. And whatever your labors and aspirations, in the noisy confusion of life, keep peace in your soul. With all its sham, drudgery, and broken dreams, it is still a beautiful world. Be cheerful. Strive to be happy.
It is not difficult, in my opinion, to see the moral lesson that Desiderata has to offer the reader. And it is also not difficult to recognize the standard grammatical and syntactic structures that the poem is comprised of. Prose poetry really became popular during the modernist period, where the world was recovering from the apocalypse of the First World War, and artists and poets and authors were trying to do what they could to repair a world that had seemingly gone mad with violence and corruption. And it quickly fell out of favor, and then resurged in the 50s and 60s when the beat poets like Jack Kerouac and Allen Ginsberg revived the form, maybe not self-consciously, but used more free-form conversational styles in their poetic constructions, prose poetry. Our next form is an ode. We are going to look at an Ode on a Grecian Urn by John Keats from 1889. And we'll just start with the poem and then talk more about its features afterwards.
Ode on a Grecian Urn by John Keats. Thou still unravished bride of quietness, thou foster child of silence and slow time, sylvan historian, who canst thus express a flowery tale more sweetly than our rhyme? What leaf-fringed legend haunts about thy shape, of deities or mortals, or of both, in Tempe or the dales of Arcady? What men or gods are these? What maidens loath? What mad pursuit? What struggle to escape? What pipes and timbrels? What wild ecstasy? Heard melodies are sweet, but those unheard are sweeter. Therefore ye soft pipes play on, not to the sensual ear, but more endeared. Pipe to the spirited ditties of no tone. Fair youth, beneath the trees, thou canst not leave thy song, nor ever can those trees be bare. Bold lover, never, never canst thou kiss, though winning near the goal. Yet do not grieve, she cannot fade. Though thou hast not thy bliss, forever wilt thou love, and she be fair. Ah, happy, happy boughs, that cannot shed your leaves, nor ever bid the spring adieu. And happy melodist, unwearied, forever piping songs forever new. More happy love, more happy, happy love, forever warm and still to be enjoyed, forever panting and forever young, all breathing human passion far above, that leaves a heart high sorrowful and cloyed, a burning forehead and a parching tongue. Who are these coming to the sacrifice? To what green altar, O mysterious priest, leadst thou that heifer glowing at the skies, and all her silken flanks with garlands dressed? What little town by river or seashore, or mountain built with peaceful citadel, is emptied of its folk at this pious morn? And, little town, thy streets forevermore will silent be, and not a soul to tell why thou art desolate can e'er return. O Attic shape, fair attitude, with breed of marble men and maidens overwrought, with forest branches and the trodden weed, thou, silent form, dost tease us out of thought as doth eternity, cold pastoral. When old age shall this generation waste, thou shalt remain, in midst of other woe than ours, a friend to man, to whom thou sayest, beauty is truth, truth beauty. That is all ye know on earth, and all ye need to know.
When you examine this ode, it becomes quite clear that Keats is talking to and about the actual Grecian urn, and there's a depiction of the urn that Keats produced on the right of the chart. He is almost narrating what the viewer would see engraved or painted onto the ancient Greek urn that is the subject of this ode. An ode praises a person or some sort of abstract idea. The poet talks about or to the person, the natural scene or object, or the abstract idea. That is the subject of the poem. You can see that it is often very solemn, serious in its tone. And there are the poetic patterns, the stanzas and the rhyme schemes. They're very, very elaborate. There are three kinds of odes. Two of them really didn't survive the classical period in any significant sense. A Pindar ode, and a Horatian or an ode that Horace, the Roman poet and philosopher, developed. But the irregular ode, and this is an example of an irregular ode, did endure and is the subject of much literary study today. They have fixed verse, so there is a meter in them, and they can be rhymed, but the rhyme scheme, there is no formalized rhyme scheme. There's no requirement to rhyme in a certain way. So irregular odes are or many of the odes that we study in poetry today, coming out of the Renaissance and the Romantic period. And this example that Keats has provided came out of the Romantic period, the 19th century. We shall move on to the epic. An epic is a long-form poem. The Odyssey by Homer, 18th century BCE, was some 12,000 lines long. It's quite epic. Very long story. And the reader is dropped into the middle of the story. In Latin, the term is in media res, but the plot of an epic begins in the middle. And there's a series of flashbacks, sometimes flash forwards. The Odyssey, in this case, begins with the hero, Odysseus, trapped on the island of a nymph, Calypso, who will not let him leave to go home to Ithaca. But there is a significant portion of the story that happens before the beginning, which the narrator and often Odysseus himself narrates. He is the man of twists and turns, and those twists and turns take him all over the Aegean in his effort to get back to his homeland. Meanwhile, in his homeland, he is gone a decade or more. His son grows and goes to find him, and his wife is besieged in Odysseus's palace by men who want to marry her, assuming that her husband is dead. So all of this is happening at the beginning of the poem, and the poet seeks to explain the story in a non-linear fashion. There is much suffering and a series of ordeals that the epic hero goes through. The epic hero changes during the course of the journey, and also physically journeys and confronts all sorts of challenging situations. Those situations and those challenges change and redeem the hero, and there is a significant participation by the supernatural, gods, goddesses, creatures that don't really exist in what we would consider real life, but they do appear in the Odyssey and in epics in general. The epic hero is important, normally a noble, a king, a queen, a prince, always strong and courageous, the person that has to travel from their homeland and return, but also does so humbly and as a representative of human frailty. Again, the supernatural help and hinder the hero, and the hero is often representative of a nation or a culture and the very best of that nation or culture. So while the Odyssey is a long poem, some 12,000 lines long, in Greek it was in dactylic hexameter. In English, the English translation wasn't able to sustain the Greek meter. So it is essentially free verse after being translated. But here are the first 18 lines, and you'll notice that at the beginning of the poem, the poet invokes the muse, meaning he calls out to creativity to help him tell the tale. And you'll see that in many different epic forms, that the poet speaks directly to art for support in expressing him or herself. It'll take me a second. I'll have to go out of the presentation to begin. But this is the first 18 lines of the Odyssey by Homer.
Sing to me of the man, muse, the man of twists and turns, driven time and again off course, once he had plundered the hallowed heights of Troy. Many cities of men he saw and learned their minds. Many pains he suffered, heartsick, on the open sea, fighting to save his life and bring his comrades home. But he could not save them from disaster, hard as he strove. The recklessness of their own ways destroyed them all. The blind fools, they devoured the cattle of the sun, and the sun god blotted out the day of their return. Launch out on his story, muse, daughter of Zeus. Start from where you will. Sing for our time, too. By now, all the survivors, all who avoided headlong death, were safe at home, escaped the wars and waves. But one man alone, his heart set on his wife and his return, Calypso, the bewitching nymph, the lustrous goddess, held him back, deep in her arching caverns, craving him for a husband. But then, when the wheeling...
It is not difficult to detect all of the features that we associate with epics in this 18-line section of the Odyssey. You can see gods and goddesses and trials and tribulations, and the fact that we are not beginning at the beginning, we're beginning in the middle. We see a discussion of the hero and his qualities. It is remarkable how the epic, being millennia old, still speaks to us about us and about the very best and worst of us. Moving on, an elegy. An elegy is a poem that honors another person at the time of their death. Interestingly, an elegy can also include an appeal to art or the muse at the beginning, where the poet asks for the assistance of their skill or their art to help them tell the story of a person's virtue. You'll see that, especially in Auden's elegy of Yeats, the standard rhyme scheme, the formulaic rhyme scheme exists, but there is a significant portion of the poem that's also in free verse, unrhymed. So we do see the A, B, B, C, C, D, D rhyme scheme for an elegy, but we also see in Auden's text that there's a lot of free verse as well. There's a comparison that goes on, the life of the poet and of others, to the life and accomplishments of the subject of the elegy. In this particular case, Yeats is a famous Irish poet. Auden is someone who came after, a poet that came after Yeats, but he is honoring Yeats through his own poetry. Auden is. And also, it's important to note that it's more than just a honoring of the subject. It's what that subject's life may represent beyond the person themselves, where they stood in the world or what they did for others. You'll hear in this that the final stanza has the formal rhyme scheme, the A, B, B, C, C, the elegetic couplets, but most of this, the beginning of this poem, is not rhymed. This makes it quite interesting. And so here is W.H. Auden's elegy of William Butler Yeats in memory of W.B. Yeats, 1939.
In memory of W.B. Yeats by W.H. Auden. He disappeared in the dead of winter. The brooks were frozen, the airports almost deserted. The snow disfigured the public statues. The mercury sank in the mouth of the dying day. What instruments we have agree, the day of his death was a dark, cold day. Far from his illness, the wolves ran on through the evergreen forests. The peasant river was untempted by the fashionable quays. By morning tongues, the death of the poet was kept from his poems. But for him, it was the last afternoon as himself, an afternoon of nurses and rumours. The provinces of his body revolted. The squares of his mind were empty. Silence invaded the suburbs. The current of his feeling failed. He became his admirers. Now he is scattered among 100 cities, unwholly given over to unfamiliar affections, to find his happiness in another kind of wood, and be punished under a foreign code of conscience. the words of a dead man are modified in the guts of the living. But in the importance and noise of tomorrow, when the brokers are roaring like beasts on the floor of the bourse, and the poor have the sufferings to which they are fairly accustomed, and each in the cell of himself is almost convinced of his freedom, a few thousand will think of this day as one thinks of a day when one did something slightly unusual. What instruments we have agree. The day of his death was a dark, cold day. You were silly like us. Your gift survived it all. The parish of rich women, physical decay. Yourself, mad Ireland hurt you into poetry. Now Ireland has her madness and her weather still, for poetry makes nothing happen. It survives in the valley of its making, where executives would never want to tamper, flows on south from ranches of isolation and the busy griefs, raw towns that we believe and die in. It survives a way of happening, a mouth. Earth, receive an honored guest. William Yeats is laid to rest. Let the Irish vessel lie, emptied of its poetry. Time that is intolerant of the brave and innocent, and indifferent in a week to a beautiful physique, worships language and forgives everyone by whom it lives, pardons cowardice, conceit, lays its honors at their feet. Time that with this strange excuse pardon Kipling and his views, and will pardon Paul Claudel, pardon him for writing well. In the nightmare of the dark, all the dogs of Europe bark, and the living nations wait, each sequestered in its hate. Intellectual disgrace stares from every human face, and the seas of pity lie, locked and frozen in each eye. Follow, poet, follow right to the bottom of the night. With your unconstraining voice, still persuade us to rejoice. With the farming of a verse, make a vineyard of the curse. Sing of human unsuccess in a rapture of distress. In the deserts of the heart, let the healing fountain start. In the prison of his days, teach the free man how to praise.
The elegy, represented here by In Memory of W.B. Yeats by W.H. Auden, 1939. We'll move on. Pastoral poetry. Let's begin with the poem Christopher Marlowe's The Passionate Shepherd to His Love from 1599. Marlowe was a contemporary of William Shakespeare, and this is his pastoral.
The Passionate Shepherd to His Love by Christopher Marlowe. Come live with me, and be my love, and we will all the pleasures prove that valleys, groves, hills and fields, woods or steepy mountain yields. And we will sit upon the rocks, seeing the shepherds feed their flocks by shallow rivers, to whose falls melodious birds sing madrigals. And I will make thee beds of roses, and 1,000 fragrant posies, a cap of flowers, and a kirtle, embroidered all with leaves of myrtle, a gown made of the finest wool, which from our pretty lambs we pull, fair lined slippers for the cold, with buckles of the purest gold, a belt of straw and ivy buds, with coral clasps and amber studs. And if these pleasures may thee move, come live with me, and be my love. The shepherd swain shall dance and sing for thy delight each May morning. If these delights thy mind may move, then live with me, and be my love.
So Marlowe's pastoral offers a beautiful, natural setting. And interestingly, the shepherd as an archetype, appears again and again in pastoral poetry, probably tied to the political or religious function of a shepherd leading the flock from where they are to a better place. Like a political leader leads a nation, or a religious leader leads the faithful. This focus on beauty and nature presents an idealized sense of some golden age, some time of beauty, where people lived honestly in harmony with themselves and with nature. The poet offers a more hopeful, more beautiful, more peaceful way to live. And in this particular case, the shepherd is offering his love to another, a love that they can enjoy in the fields surrounded by flowers and peaceful animals. The rhyme scheme. There is a distinct rhyme scheme and a meter here, but there is no customary formulaic rhyme scheme or rhythm to a pastoral. It can also be free verse as well, but this is a Renaissance period poem, and you're going to see more of a definitive meter and a rhyme scheme. Love, prove, fields, yields, that's AABB. Rocks, flocks, CC, falls, manregals, roses, posies, curdle, myrtle. Those are end rhymes, end rhymed couplets. But that's particular to this poem. It is not a part of the form itself. That brings us to our assignment. Assignment 30 asks you to look at 6 different poetic forms, and in this assignment, different from assignment 29, instead of picking out the form, I tell you what the form is, you actually pick the most distinctive characteristic. So here is a excerpt from Virgil's Roman epic, the Aeneid, and then you pick what feature, that is characteristics of the epic, appears. Here is a praise poem by Denez Smith, and you pick the feature. Here's "O Captain, My Captain" from Walt Whitman. You pick the feature that's most evident. The Nymph's Reply to the Shepherd, which is Sir Walter Raleigh's 1600 parody of Christopher Marlowe's pastoral that we looked at. Pick the feature of the pastoral that appears. Here is an ode by Shelley. What is the most prevalent feature of the ode? And then finally, here is Shel Silverstein's Paul Bunyan, and it's a narrative poem, and what feature does it have? It's a multiple choice assessment, and you'll get full credit for attempting each question. That brings us to the end of webinar 3C. I look forward to our next webinar, which will be a discussion of ambiguity, paradox, and irony in literature, and how through the close reading process we can identify those features and use them to develop an interpretation of meaning.